We usually study leaders to learn the secrets of their success, right? But today, we're flipping the script in this explainer. We're unpacking the incredibly dramatic and ultimately tragic story of a leader whose immense success actually became his absolute undoing, King Uzziah. We'll be diving deep into some fascinating source material to uncover a really profound lesson about the hidden, creeping dangers of unchecked success. So just picture this for a second. How does a mighty king, a man who ruled a nation for a staggering 52 years, end up quarantined in death? He wasn't even allowed to be buried inside the royal tombs with his own ancestors. Nope, he was placed out in an adjoining field because he was a leper. He died completely isolated from his very own legacy. To figure out how on earth he ended up there, we really have to rewind the clock. Part 1. A king's unprecedented reign. To truly grasp the crushing depth of his fall, we first have to understand his deeply entrenched power. Uzziah wasn't just a passing ruler, he was an era-defining monarch. Our source material actually draws a fascinating parallel here to King Senjo of the Korean Joseon dynasty. What do they have in common? Well, both men sat on their respective thrones for exactly 52 years. And honestly, surviving on a throne for over half a century means one thing for sure. You have an absolute iron grip on your kingdom. You know the system inside and out, you know exactly how to handle your officials, and your authority becomes deeply, almost unshakably rooted. To his people, Uzziah wasn't just a king, he was an absolute institution. Part 2. The secret to success. But how does a 16-year-old boy, which, by the way, is how old Uzziah was when he first took the throne, grow to achieve such a massive, stable reign? You certainly don't just stumble into 52 years of entrenched power. Well, Uzziah didn't achieve it alone. The text highlights a sort of secret weapon, a spiritual mentor named Zechariah. Now, this wasn't just your standard political advisor. Zechariah was someone who understood divine visions and actively instructed the young king in the fear of God, really guiding those crucial formative steps as a ruler. The absolute most crucial detail here boils down to 3 words: as long as. The source material heavily emphasizes this specific condition. It completely foreshadows that Uzziah's faith, and by extension his incredible prosperity, was borrowed. It was entirely dependent on his reliance on God through his mentor. It introduces this incredibly tense, ticking clock into the whole narrative. I mean, what happens when the mentor is gone? What happens when that as long as officially expires? Part 3. The Golden Age. Well, while that condition held, with God's backing, Uzziah didn't just survive those early years. He ushered in a monumental era of prosperity that put his nation on the map in a massive way. First and foremost, he built an untouchable military titan. We aren't talking about a ragtag makeshift militia here. Uzziah boasted a highly organized elite combat force of over 300,000 soldiers. He single-handedly shifted the entire balance of power in the region. And his resume of triumphs? Absolutely monumental. He wasn't just a military genius who defeated his neighbors, like the Philistines and Arabians, and exacted heavy tribute from the Ammonites. He was essentially a pioneer of ancient defense industries. He literally invented machines to shoot arrows and launch massive stones from the city walls. But it wasn't all war. He was also this brilliant agricultural visionary who built defensive towers in the wilderness, dug numerous wells, and totally transformed the land just because he loved the soil. His fame spread incredibly far, and the text is quick to point out that it was all because he received marvelous help. Part 4. The Turning Point. But this is where the narrative takes a really sharp, dark turn. Right at the absolute peak of his golden age, just when things couldn't possibly get any better, the foundation begins to crack. There's a fascinating shift in the text. The very moment he forgets that marvelous help that established him in the first place, human hubris grabs the wheel. The word help completely vanishes from the story, replaced entirely by his own towering ego. This verse brilliantly captures the tragic irony of human nature. The source text points out that we are most likely to forget the true source of our success right when we feel the most invincible. The longer Uzziah's resume of victories grew, the heavier the weight of his pride became, pulling him straight down to his own destruction. Part 5. The Temple Showdown. This unchecked pride leads directly to one of the most tense and dramatic confrontations in all of biblical history. It literally plays out like a high-stakes cinematic thriller. Uzziah decides that his massive earthly authority means he no longer has to respect God's divine boundaries. He attempts to march right into the temple to burn incense, which was a secret rite strictly and unconditionally reserved for the consecrated priests. He decides to completely blur the line between his political dominance and the spiritual realm. Just imagine the sheer tension of this rapid escalation. An absolute monarch who has reigned for 52 years, a man whose word has literally been unquestioned law for decades, forcefully enters the temple with a censer in hand. Suddenly, he's blocked. High Priest Azariah and 80 incredibly courageous priests stand in his way. They are quite literally risking their lives to tell the king to step down. And instead of feeling ashamed or backing off, Uzziah just explodes in a blind rage. It's at that exact moment of fury that leprosy instantly breaks out right on his forehead. Divine judgment falls in real time. The source analysis makes such a brilliant observation about this moment. Uzziah's fatal flaw wasn't merely that he picked up the censer and made a mistake. Honestly, if he had just dropped it when confronted, history might have been completely different. His ultimate downfall, the absolute pinnacle of his pride, was his furious refusal to drop it when confronted by the truth. Think about it. A humble person pauses when corrected, but a proud person explodes. Part 6, The Unshakable Heavenly Throne. The aftermath of this massive showdown leaves a devastating void in the nation, but it also sets the perfect stage for a spectacular revelation. While Uzziah spends his final days as a quarantined outcast, completely stripped of his majesty, leprous, and totally isolated from the very temple he tried to conquer, the text pivots to reveal the ultimate contrast. The nation is in shock, grieving the loss of their 52-year leader, but someone else is looking up. The prophet Isaiah looks right past the political chaos and realizes something incredibly profound. Even when the most entrenched 52-year earthly pillar collapses in absolute disgrace, the true king's throne in heaven remains perfectly secure and entirely unshaken. Earthly power is incredibly fragile, especially when it's built on a foundation of pride, but divine authority, that is eternal. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take away from this explainer. As you accumulate your own victories, build up your own expertise, and rack up your own years of success, what exactly are you building? Are you letting that success build a stubborn fortress of pride that makes you totally immune to correction? Or are you remembering the help you've received along the way, remaining deeply humble before the only throne that truly matters? It's a very fine line between hubris and humility. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep learning.